This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm your host, Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, is Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
We have a great show for you today. I'm going to give you a couple of book reviews, Enshittification and Breakneck. But first, Adam, do devices in schools help learning?
Great question, Darren. Technology is good, right? The future, now the present, will be dominated by devices, so it's best to prepare kids to use these by having devices in the classroom, or so the basic logic would dictate. So, how's that working out? Last month, you may have seen headlines or statements like this. Gen Z is the first generation to be less intelligent than the preceding one.
I hadn't seen that.
You hadn't? Okay, I saw this a lot in my circle. Okay.
I think that's actually very divisive.
It was. Another type of headline would be, the Flynn effect has been reversed. And what do these have to do with each other? Well, the statements about Gen Z come from a testimony to the U.S. Senate by neuroscientist Jared Cooney Horvath. He claims that Gen Z is the first generation to score lower on standardized tests than the predecessor, in this case, millennials. So millennials like to share this and be like, oh, we're so smart because these guys are, for once, the next generation isn't smarter. This is an anomaly as it is the first generation in modern history to score lower rather than higher than the generation preceding it. And for a news cycle, people speculated about the reason, but ignored that he straight up stated what he thought the reason was, which is devices such as computers and tablets in schools. So this is a podcast. I understand that. You're probably getting this on your phone or another kind of digital device, especially if you've been around for a while. You might have been an earlier adopter on technology. So I feel like our audience might be inclined to reject this premise. I happen to think he may be right, and it seems consistent with what I've read on the topic, and I wanted to dive in. Let's give a bit of context and personal history here. I am a computer guy, okay? At home, my family got a personal computer when I was around 12. Before that, I used to play with these like Unisys Icon computers at school, and I do fun things with them. I play Logo, which is like digital spirograph. You have the turtle that goes around and you would do commands, and I thought that was a lot of fun. When I got my home computer, I'd do things like I'd play in Paintbrush, now MS Paint. I quickly got into writing computer programs, first in QBasic, then Turbo Pascal. I went on to study computer science and computer engineering, and I've worked in computer system support for 22 years. So that wasn't necessarily typical of the 90s, but it's also not really anything close to what most kids are doing in school or at home with these kind of devices. In the 80s and 90s, computers were so difficult to use that you need a class just to learn to use them. Just running a program on a computer might require a decent level of knowledge for how that machine worked. But half a century later, the devices we use aren't awkward machines made by and for fellow computer programmers. They're optimized and A/B tested to be as easy to use as possible. A toddler or an elderly person can pick up a laptop, a tablet, or a phone and easily navigate that UI.
I mean, not all elderly people.
For people my age, the joke was that children would help their parents use their computers, and we wondered how amazingly skilled the next generation would be with computers. But then that same generation, now the older generation, is teaching younger ones how computers work. Devices in schools weren't really a thing when I was in school. I mentioned the Unisys Icon computers, but that was kind of a treat used specifically for computer classes or computer labs. It wasn't really involved in day-to-day learning. I have bad handwriting, so I wrote a lot of my assignments or projects typed up and printed out. It wasn't really typical for people of my generation, but that's pretty much the extent of using computers for school outside of actual computer programming class, typing class, and things like that when I was in high school. Even in university, though computers were common in labs, laptops were rare, and I never really used a laptop until I was, quite done school. As a heavy computer user, I would certainly have expected that giving kids computers early made sense. When I was about 20 in 1998, I worked in a library supporting this computer program by Microsoft, which tried to give internet access to disadvantaged communities. I just supported the computers that the kids and adults would use to browse the internet. At the time, there were many people that didn't have internet access at home, and the idea was to kind of democratize information, give everyone access and stuff like that. Kids would browse primitive message boards and chat pages. If they'd met something up on the computer, I was there to basically fix it. And it's usually restart the browser, restart the computer, and simple stuff. But yeah, I was okay at that.
Yeah.
So I assume this was all good. The logic seems sound, right? It was paid work, so I wasn't trying to change the world, but, I think that kind of reasoning was that it would help. And a bit about my own kids. I don't really restrict TV for my kids, but I don't let my kids watch like YouTube or short video content. They have access to tablets, which they'll use to watch movies for long car rides, but I pretty much limit what they can do with them. My daughter used to watch garbage YouTube all the time. She could do this for hours, zone out. I tried really hard to limit the hours of the day or how much she could do it. And it was a constant struggle. And finally, I just said, you know what? No more YouTube. It's gone 100%. After a few days, no more problems. Night and day. So if you're a parent, you're struggling, try cutting it off 100%.
Sometimes zero is better than some, which is not usually how things work.
No, I mean, as an adult with most things, all things in moderation is kind of like the philosophy I have about most things in life. But in this case, moderation was not working. It was causing more problems.
Aristotle hadn't seen YouTube shorts.
Fair. So parents, I think, can instantly see how mesmerizing short-form videos like YouTube Shorts, TikToks, Instagram Reels can be for kids. I think they're clearly terrible. And that's generally not in schools. That's just devices that kids use at home that can be kind of bad. I really do feel that the type of content on these devices makes a big difference. I often hear people say, like, well, it doesn't really matter. A TV show's kind of the same as watching YouTube. No, I think phones and tablets are worse. I think short form video is worse. I think computers and TVs and longer form content is generally better. And I think there's a spectrum. And I don't think it's clear cut to say like screen's bad, for example, something like that. Some things are more or less engaging, more or less habit forming, and that can be a bigger problem for children. My daughter's in 3rd grade and tells me that her teacher once asked her class how many kids watched YouTube videos at home. Everyone but her said they did. So I think this is pretty common.
And maybe some peer pressure.
Oh, yeah, maybe. I don't know. Well, she gets pressure from the other kids to watch YouTube videos.
Of course.
She comes home and she's like, oh, so-and-so watches this and so-and-so watches this. And it's fine. They're not going to stop being your friends because you're not watching Mr. Beast. Like, it's okay.
I mean, they might, but then you shouldn't be friends with them anyway.
Yeah, but we watched the Mr. Beast show on Amazon, which
just a different screen.
less terrible for her. So I'd read 2 books which looked at this issue. Both came to the same conclusion. The first was The Village Effect, a 2014 book by Susan Pinker, which explores the importance of face-to-face contact and, by extension, the downsides of isolation due to technology. And the other was The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, a more recent work from 2024, which examines why the generation in question from the study has a lot of issues and focuses, amongst other things, on devices. So I reread the relevant chapters in both as a refresher. The Village Effect, a book published 12 years ago, seems a bit dated, but the general idea kind of sticks. In the chapter Teens and Screens, Susan Pinker largely looks at computer programs and phones, as tablets in schools were less common at the time. A lot of this focuses on screens and social media outside of the classroom, which leads to cyberbullying and self-esteem issues, mostly with girls. For scholastic achievement, having a device at home is presented as a distraction from homework, and displacement is a big concern. I've talked about this before. So basically, if a kid is spending time online instead of doing other things, then that's an issue because they're not doing the other thing. So this is the reason for which TV watching correlates with all sorts of bad measures, video games and all sorts of things like that generally will correlate negatively with scholastic achievement. It's like, you're not doing your homework because you're doing this other thing. So is that all the same? Yeah, TV bad, tablet bad, but like I said, I think there's a difference in the quality of what those kids could be doing. So students who would use a computer at home between grades 5 and 8 would see reduced reading and math scores. And at the time I first read this, I thought it was funny to imagine a kid without access to a computer. And now, since then, computers are actually less common in a home, as they've often been replaced with phones and tablets. So I think, some families, I think very few families didn't have computers in the home then. I think some families now, they just don't. The research, as the author explains it, doesn't support the idea that devices in the classroom, in this case, laptops and Chromebooks, was helping academic performance, but actually hindered it. At best, they did nothing, and at worst, they were a distraction and made students measurably worse. Children liked them and felt engaged with them, but that didn't improve performance. And Pinker highlights that the problem with devices in schools is that teachers don't know how to use them, and that there can be benefits when they're coupled with teacher training, but this can occur with teachers just getting training with or without devices. In The Anxious Generation, it was a bit of the same story. Jonathan Haidt is focused less on devices being used for schooling. He's more concerned with keeping phones and personal devices outside of the classroom and makes a strong case for that being necessary. He cites examples of schools going phone-free and specifies that this needs to be phone-free throughout the school day and not just phones not permitted in classes during lectures, because then basically kids will get outside of the class and they'll whip out their phone, they'll do less socializing, and the negative impacts are still there. He cites UNESCO research which showed adverse effects of digital technology on learning. And this research also agreed that phone use led to reduced educational performance and increased classroom disruption. And to me, this seems kind of obvious, but for those for whom it might not be, the research supports the idea. He highlights that the tech executives who make the devices and software that kids are addicted to often sends their own children to schools where phones are prohibited.
Yeah, I've heard that. I think it's hard to really get some confirmation on that, though.
Well, he speaks specifically about something called the Waldorf School. Now, I don't know where everyone's kids go. You'd kind of have to break it down, but it definitely seems like Mark Zuckerberg's kids aren't addicted to their iPad, you know? I think...
Well, again, I think it's true.
Yeah.
I just meant it's really hard to... Because going beyond that, what I've heard is that they don't even have devices at home.
Yeah.
When they're like, well, you're not going to spy on the tech execs. They spy on us. That's how the arrangement works. So I'm saying it's plausible.
Yeah.
And I even think it's likely. It'd be hard to confirm. All you'd have is someone's like, oh, I know them.
Yeah.
We all don't do that. And you're like, well, but that's still secondhand.
Yeah. Probably when you dived into the company, probably a lot of people that work at Apple or Google probably have kids that just have devices all the time because they're just affluent families who are into tech.
Mm-hmm.
Just whatever. It's just kind of funny. Kind of, I don't know, ironic, hypocritical, something like that. So he shows that test scores dropped during the pandemic due to reliance on technology, but also says that this was a continuation of a trend which had started before the pandemic, again due to devices, as kids went from older phones to smartphones. And he, like Pinker, highlights that the worst effects are on the worst students. So a student from a poor background, such as those from a low socioeconomic status or homes with a single parent, are more negatively affected by devices as they're less likely to have a parent there to regulate their device use. This was common when devices were introduced in developing countries without any real controls. So the idea was we'll just give these poor kids some computers and they'll go out to learn and it's going to change the world. The more disadvantaged kids weren't using them for learning. So great. What was this news trend about? Well, there was a sort of second news cycle about it more recently, and it was less focused on the Gen Z is dumb angle, and it was more looking at the actual claim, and I think people are talking about devices and learning and things like that. The author of the testimony to Congress, neuroscientist and educator Dr. Jared Cooney Horvath, argues that the reason for the drop in test scores is due to what he calls EdTech, educational technology, devices which occupy a significant share of instructional time, assessment, homework, and student attention. He states that the available evidence from international assessments, large-scale academic studies, and meta-analysis show that increased classroom exposure is generally associated with weaker learning outcomes, not stronger ones. He says that in most core academic contexts, screens slow learning, reduce depth of understanding, and weaken retention. Modern kids can spend hours a day on devices, and he says students are off task 38 minutes of every 60 minutes on a classroom device. To be clear, he isn't just saying we've got more devices over time and IQ has dropped, therefore he correlates it. When we assess, for example, 15-year-olds across a dozen countries and have them self-report classroom computer use, higher exposure consistently corresponds to lower reading, math, and science scores. You can isolate these variables because there's a lot of different kids in a lot of different schools and a lot of different programs. His review of meta-analysis suggests most report small positive effect sizes. However, he says that this type of research systematically inflates positive effects because conditions vary wildly and lack a rigorous baseline. So he says the results are worse when devices are used generally, but more positive when they're targeted to something specific. Yes, you should use a computer in your computer programming class.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense, of course.
He claims that reading and writing have stronger results on paper and with handwriting than with devices. Another article, which was published in the New York Times more recently, shows what kind of device use kids have in school. It shows that in some schools, children as young as kindergarten are using iPads to play games, watch shows, and YouTube videos. Parents who are striving to keep their kids off of devices at home have them end up using them at school or even at daycare. One parent in the article mentions that after recording a video of her daughter dancing, she asked them to like and subscribe.
Of course. And who isn't excited for digital recess?
Yes. So I can see how that's a concern for sure as a parent. You don't want your kid to do something. I think it's also worth kind of considering. I think kids can kind of compartmentalize their behavior pretty well. So if a kid's being exposed to a tablet at school, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to have tablet addiction at home if they just don't have a tablet at home. But yeah, it can be a problem if they come home and they're like, hey, I want to watch YouTube. And you're like, no, we're not doing that. Another piece of evidence, a recent meta-analysis from JAMA Pediatrics titled Digital Media Use and Child Health and Development, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis by researchers including Samantha Teague, Claire Sommeray, and Adrian Shattle, determined that it's not so much about school but device use in general. It looked at 153 longitudinal studies and determined that poor developmental outcomes were associated with digital media use in children and adolescents. Social media use was associated with depression, behavioral problems, self-injury, substance abuse, low self-esteem, and low academic achievements. So this is just some research. I can't hope to really cover everything that's been written on this topic. Surely there is more, but from what I've seen, this is the kind of message I often hear. If there are positive effects, they're small. Sometimes there are no effects. Sometimes there are negative effects. The negative impacts to devices is clear. The benefits, not so much. I think devices in schools are a bad idea. The people promoting their use have good intentions, but they should be paying attention to the easily available evidence showing that they don't seem to help kids learn. Further, device use at home is associated with a lot of negative impacts to children, teenagers, and surely adults as well, though that is out of scope for this segment. The devices, apps, and content which children are drawn to are specifically engineered to be maximally engaging, and their well-being is not the standard for which the success of that application is measured. Parents should limit the quantity and type of content that their children consume and use what influence they have to dissuade device use in the classroom. If you do have kids, I recommend reading Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. It very clearly expresses an ongoing issue and challenge facing today's children, which is a much broader problem and mostly not related to what I've talked about today, but I think it's worth checking out. He lays out suggestions for parents, which you might find useful.
Well, thank you, Adam. I'm going to be a bit more skeptical than you.
Sure.
And my comments will somewhat parallel what I think of Jonathan Haidt's book, which I have not read, by the way,
Okay.
which is that I generally agree with the policy prescriptions.
Yes.
There's something amiss. It's probably best to not have the devices there. Have children play more. Have them have more unstructured social time. Less safetyism. Like, all that makes sense.
Let kids get bored. Stuff like that. Yeah.
Exactly. All good. That said, I think the evidence is not as clear as you've presented it. Now, you've looked into it a little bit more than I have, at least recently. But I do remember Haidt and I think it was Chris Ball. They had an online collaborative Google Doc, which tried to explore the main hypotheses in the anxious generation.
Yep.
And it ended up being like over 150 pages.
Wow.
And that wasn't people making notes. That was people just linking studies.
Yeah.
And meta-analyses versus meta-analyses. Yep. It's brutal.
Yeah.
So I think if we had an expert who was opposed to the belief that you just presented,
yes,
they would have all sorts of evidence.
Probably.
And they would have a meta-analysis.
Yes.
And they'd have longitudinal data. And they'd have all this stuff. And you're like, so what do we make of this? We make of this that it's very hard to disentangle these things. As Adam did allude to, there's going to be a diverse range of impacts.
Yes.
And some students will benefit from more device time.
Yes.
Right? You can imagine, say you're motivated, you like to learn, and you're a bit bored in class. Boy, would a device help you.
Yeah.
Look, I can learn all day. Click, 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 click. And someone else is like, I'm just playing games all day. Click, 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 click.
Yeah, you can do good and bad things with any kind of device.
Correct.
Absolutely.
Right. And as you said, structured time versus unstructured time, or how much kids are distracted. Even that line that, like 38 minutes of every hour, kids are not maybe paying attention because of devices. I'm like, well, when I was in class,
that's a lot.
Were some kids paying attention at all?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I was paying attention 22 minutes out of every hour for most of my day.
Right. So you start to think about, well, wait a minute. Just some people stare at the window. Some people like walk around their desk. They pretended to do things. People would write their name, like their signature, right? Because they're going to be world famous someday.
That funny S, the stylized S, stuff like that.
So there's numerous things that people did. So it's tricky though, because I think I don't have kids. I'm concerned about this generation. They do seem more anxious for some reasons. I do think a lot of social media is bad for humans, not just young children, but adults.
Yep.
And then for other people, it's like beneficial, right? Or it's more like it does a pro and a con at the same time, right? There's this thing that's good, and it also comes with this bad thing. You can connect with more people, and then sometimes it makes you feel worse about your life. Yeah. And so I think it's really hard to disentangle. So I would say that, it's probably best not to have kids using phones all the time, especially at school. I think that's just an obvious choice. Yep. And if you have to come up with evidence, well, so be it, because we want to be evidence-based. Otherwise, well, why am I saying that? Do I have any good reason? Well, unless there's an emergency, why do you need to be that connected all the time, right? There is something about letting your thoughts wander and consolidate information versus always reaching for the next, we'll say, flash of dopamine.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate that, Darren. I think some of our listeners will probably object to some of the things I said, so it's nice that you voiced it. So
There you go.
we kind of have it covered.
One less email for someone to send.
But please do feel free to write in. If
Or you can write in. Who do you agree with more, Adam or Darren? Even though we largely agree with each other.
Sure.
Speaking of devices, that's what I use to listen to audiobooks.
Uh-huh.
And I keep listening, so I'll keep sharing them. That's what I'm talking about today. Book reviews. 2 of them. First, Enshittification by Cory Doctorow, and then next, Breakneck by Dan Wang. Okay, so Enshittification by Cory Doctorow. Yes, that's Enshittification. In case you've never heard this term, you're like, what is he saying? It's a made-up word by Doctorow.
We're not going to that out every time.
No, we're not. Because it's not, in theory, it's not a self-bad word.
Okay.
First, a quick AI summary. Cory Doctorow's thesis on enshittification, a term he coined in 2022, describes a predictable 3-stage life cycle of decay for digital platforms. He argues that this process is an intentional business strategy driven by the need to maximize shareholder value once a company has achieved market dominance.
Oh.
Right? 3 stages. Number 1, be good to users. To gain a massive user base, the platform initially offers high-quality services at a loss or with heavy subsidies. This creates lock-in through network effects, where you stay because everyone you know is there. This is what many of us old people think of as the golden age. Back
When
in the
YouTube
day,
was good,
YouTube was good, the internet was better, life was good. Number 2, be good to business customers. Once users are locked in, the platform shifts its focus to attracting suppliers and advertisers, business customers. It offers them access to the user base on favorable terms, often at the expense of the original user experience.
Oh, interesting. That's when the ads proliferate.
You are the data. And number 3, be good to shareholders. Once both users and business customers are locked in, the platform claws back value from both groups. It degrades the service for everyone, increasing fees for businesses and filling users' feeds with ads or low-quality content to maximize profits for its own shareholders.
Well, why is an unhappy person spending more money?
Well, it depends on what they're trying to do and what they're trying to achieve.
Okay.
They may not see as many ads. So the example he often gives is Google. Initially, Google, great, free, no ads.
Yeah.
And then over time, you're like, oh, there's an ad on the sidebar. And now, like, there's a sponsored thing at the top. And you're like, where's the search I want? And there's some evidence that Google made their search worse so people would search again.
Oh, that's funny. I also
Funny
feel like
and terrible.
Google got into the business of putting ads on other websites. It was like they were like an ad broker for a really long time. It had nothing to do with their search engine.
Right. And then, as other people said, have you tried using Amazon lately? You search for a product. You're like, so what is this at the top? What, oh, sponsored. It's like, and so this one is the real thing. No, that's still not your result.
Yeah.
So those are some of the main arguments, which again seem pretty correct.
Yeah.
How was the book though? Well, in a word, disappointing. Doctorow is directionally correct about many aspects of big tech hegemony and their manipulations, but the book is insufficient in rigor to be cogent. The main argument seems sound, which I just described, but the bulk of the book is more of a series of loosely connected essays, most of which are not even attempting to make a sustained argument individually or as a whole. Now, perhaps my standards are too high, because I'm a cranky person who reads books, and I want, not everyone can be Daniel Dennett, but even like a Dawkins or a Pinker, come on, right?
Oh, they're great too.
But I wanted an in-depth exploration and analysis of where his thesis is true and perhaps where it isn't, or the limits of it. So he really didn't do much of a compare and contrast with examples that don't fit his framework. And this is like, well, maybe we want a science book. And too often you're like, but these aren't sciencey people. So they're not going to think about structuring their argument in a certain way. They'll just like, well, here's the dramatic things that support my thesis, and not say, here are the counterexamples, which weaken the thesis.
So he's not like a science communicator, or is it his audience that isn't really science minded?
Well, he is not. He's an intelligent guy who he's very useful digging into the weeds, especially in terms of digital rights management and that sort of thing.
Okay.
Like, if you buy something, do you really own it? And how do the corporations sort of manipulate you to always sort of use their service, even if you'd like to just freely use the thing?
Yep.
But I'm not hearing the sustained rigor and logic and rationale you might get from someone more scientific.
Yep.
Now, that said, there are people who are trained in science, and they also make bad arguments. So it's not a all or nothing there either. So, it felt like he was reusing a lot of content. He's written many essays over the years, and why don't I just stick them in this book?
So he's got a good idea, and it maybe didn't scale to a book format.
I think that's likely the case. Now, reusing content itself isn't bad, but I felt it was way too much padding and not enough putting in the effort to have a proper book.
Yeah.
Also, the absence of discussion on AI from a 2025 tech book is absurd.
Sure.
Absurd.
Yeah.
Now, I think he actually has beliefs on AI, which I don't agree with whatsoever. So maybe it would have been worse if he included it. Okay. But we'll punt that for now. In truth, over time, I came to be wary of his analyses. This is not what you want. I want to trust the author. So when they say something like, I'm not quite sure about that, like, oh, they're a linear, logical, rational, evidence-based thinker, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. And I started to do that less. That said, more people are needed to address the downsides of big tech in general. So it's possible he's net positive and this book is useful because maybe people just come away with, wait a minute, big tech is trying to take advantage of us. And his 3-part Enshittification thesis is true in some instances.
Yes.
And it can make people aware of that. And then maybe they can take action.
I wonder if this example of this happening can only go to the conclusion that he's suggesting when you're really at the top and there isn't good competition.
I mean, there is a bit of the, as it says, like market dominance.
Yeah.
So if you're a less successful business, you don't have the market power.
Yeah. So people just leave and they'll go to the bigger one and be like,
or
sorry.
A different one. That's the point. Basically, the lock-in is necessary. Like if you can easily switch, then the corporation has less power.
If Yahoo search gets terrible, it'll be like, we'll just use Google. Thanks.
Right. And the other side of this, as much as people complain about it, is that a lot of the stuff a lot of people enjoy, like Uber, like DoorDash, like all these things, it's subsidized by VC money.
I'm shocked that they're still subsidized by VC money in a lot of cases.
That's ridiculousness, right?
So you're just like, you're still killing the cab industry with a business model which is not yet viable, Yes. And eventually, once they kill it, then they can jack up the prices. Yeah.
Right? So that was Enshittification. What about Breakneck? Subtitle, China's Quest to Engineer the Future by Dan Wang. So this frames the US-China rivalry not as ideological, but as a contrast between governing cultures. China as an engineering state and the US as a lawyerly society. So he argues that China's leadership, populated with engineers, prioritizes top-down, rapid, large-scale projects, achieving remarkable infrastructure and technological growth, while the US is dominated by lawyers, which emphasize process over outcomes, leading to slow infrastructure development and regulatory bottlenecks. Each country could learn from the other. China could adopt stronger individual liberties and legal protections, while the US should reinvigorate engineering competence and industrial capability. It's not that much of a China versus US book. It's more about China with some mild comparisons to the US. It covers a range of different issues, and he did spend a lot of time in China living there at different periods. A lot of detail on the one-child policy was very interesting, informative, and horrifying. Yeah. And there's also another chunk on COVID and the COVID lockdown, which he experienced in some way while being there. So I think those are the two very useful chapters that I appreciated the most. Overall, though, the book was fine, but not as good as I thought it was going to be given all the acclaim it has. This is one of those interaction effects where if you just picked up the book on its own, you'd be like, okay, I'll read this book. One of the best books of the year. Yeah. It was on this list and that list, and Tyler Cohen thinks it's an amazing book. Really though? What am I missing something? So, as I said, useful one-child policy and the COVID lockdowns, but I wanted more detailed analysis compared to other domains and countries. He doesn't mention Europe a lot. Again, you don't hear a lot of what about in this other instance? Are his examples somewhat cherry-picked? Are they not? In short, you might have just heard me say this, a more scientific methodology to really get at some explanatory power. He is more of a historian than anything else. He doesn't want to identify as a political scientist, but to me this actually seemed like a lot of poli-sci work. But he doesn't like that designation. Now, he explicitly states that he characterizes China as being a country of engineers versus the US being a country of lawyers as a way to provoke discussion. It's not like this is a truth about the world, but I'm just raising this to be useful. But I think a lot of the explanation for differences is better explained by the good old authoritarianism versus democracy.
Yes. Yeah.
It's they were able to do this versus that. That's because the people don't have rights as much. And so he does say parts of China is like the US in the 1950s. And yes, the US would just clear out people to make room for highways or other large infrastructure projects. And China does that too. If China wants to build something, they'll just displace hundreds of thousands or 1 million, 2 million people as much as they need to.
Yeah.
And in our world, he'll talk about, there's numerous examples of projects in the States which are ridiculously burdened by red tape, environmental challenges. And there's, the examples of the rail where it always seems something more and more ridiculous, right? Well, for 1 foot of rail, they spent $1 billion, something absurd, right? We're trying to build the thing in a day or a week, right? And these things are true, but in the China case, and this is what he says in the book even, this smaller place, they built 7 airports in a relatively short period of time, which is amazing. And they're not really used though.
Oh, okay.
So that's the other side of it.
Yeah.
And they just build. And like, aren't these cities mostly empty? Well, eventually people will live there.
So they're not responding to market demand, which is the American way.
Correct. Well, I mean, yes and no. The other thing is that, again, people have more rights to challenge things, to speak out against the government, to say, I don't want this in my backyard. And this isn't, I don't know if this is like, would you characterize it a lawyerly society, that if someone's going to build something near you and you don't want it, you can criticize that.
Yes.
Yes, the most strategic way would be to hire a lawyer to then challenge the process, but it's fundamentally because you have the ability to disagree with what's happening.
Yes.
And if you don't have that ability. So I just thought, you know what's a great way to explain this? Authoritarianism versus democracy. But I think he can't say that because that's just what everyone always talks about. So if you come with
there's no novel idea when you say
right.
that.
And you're like, well, so is this idea useful? Well, I guess if people find it useful, then by definition it is. I'm not sure if this is that much. I'm not sure how beneficial this is. That's kind of an empirical question out there. Finally, and this is certainly just a picky thing on my end, near the end, the author misunderstands Robert Moses. Robert Moses was a subject of a book by Robert Caro. And the book was called The Power Broker, which is a really, really long biography. It's one of the most famous biographies of all time. Robert Moses was a parks commissioner in New York City who helped shape how New York City developed and grew because he put in lots of different infrastructure projects. And Dan Wang, the author, suggests that Moses achieved these great things, but he was elitist. And so he has this balanced view, at least at the beginning, right? Moses did this, and then he did these bad things. And he did this, and he didn't care as much about poor people. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is correct. He's like, but Moses always put things on time, on budget, and it was not really corrupt. And I was like, what? I'm like, this is not true at all. Or it's misleading. It's so misleading. Paltering might be the line where you sort of say true things, but they're not really true because you look at the details. So Robert Moses would start a project, shovels in the ground. Like say you dig up whatever it might be. You're building a new X and you're like 1/3 of the way in, and he knew he wouldn't have the money to build it at the scale he wanted.
Oh, yeah.
But now there's a hole in the ground and it's not finished. And he's like, I'm going to need some more money.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we can't have it partly built.
Yeah.
So then they give him more money. Does that mean it's on budget? Well, technically, because they gave him more money.
Yeah, there's a new budget. We've rebaselined the budget.
Right. Yeah.
That's great.
On time? Well, I planned for it to take longer, right? And so there's that. Also, yes, he never had personally a corruption charge, but he oversaw an extensive patronage regime where he had money and contracts flowing to people, numerous people, like not just tens of people, maybe hundreds of people. And it's like, yeah, so maybe he didn't get an ethics charge, but his whole thing was unethical in terms of bribing and greasing the system. So to say, again, that this is another case, like, do I trust this person's analyses? Because if they read this long book and they have all these other points, which I agree with, and they came up with that as a conclusion, that is not the right conclusion.
Yeah.
Especially if you're kind of holding up Moses to be like, shouldn't we be more like him?
Yeah.
You're like, you mean the corrupt guy who did all these sneaky things and also did not care about poor people? So I think some people really like Dan Wang's newsletters over the years, which were then sort of somewhat aggregated into this book. And if you're interested, maybe go online. His newsletters are free. You can read through those. And there is a personal touch when you hear about some insights on the ground. And as I said, the chapters I like the most about one child and the COVID lockdown. And it's not like a terrible book. It's more just, I thought it would be more. I thought it'd be more rigorous. There are no charts, data, graphs like in the book. Yeah, there are sentences which have numbers in them, right? So that kind of data. But it's not really a rigorous work in the sense you might expect from something more economically inclined, at least in terms of the audience I thought he was trying to reach. But it's on the low list, so I was wrong.
What's his background? I get the sense that he's like a lawyer who doesn't like engineers, and as an engineer who doesn't really like lawyers, I wonder if that's kind of
that is funny. Well, actually, we just looked it up in real time. He has a BA from the University of Rochester. He was in Canada. He was a Royal Canadian Army cadet for a while before going to the States. In short, he's a technology analyst who specializes in writing about contemporary China. But it's not like he has a law degree or an engineering degree or a master's or PhD in these things. He's just become a commentator that people like to listen to.
Oh, very interesting.
Thanks, Adam. And thank you, listeners, for joining us once again. Adam talked to us about devices in schools, which is a divisive topic. And thank you, Adam, for your second laugh. And I talked to you about Enshittification and Breakneck, both of which I think you don't need to read unless you're super keen, and you could probably find some really good videos and podcasts online about them. The Tyler Cowan Conversations with Tyler podcast with Dan Wang is pretty good. Until next time, think better, act better.
Peace out, keyboards.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
thank you, Adam. It's going to make it clicky sound.
Yeah. Don't worry, the Jim Carrey one's much shorter.
That's funny. No, it wasn't too long necessarily. He's just become a commentator that people like to listen.
Interesting.
Well, thanks for joining us once again. I can't thank myself.
Thanks, Darren.
Well, thank.
I'll say that. I'll say that less terrible.